change the taxes, this is what happens to sigma. It goes down. Why? Because as we get more, as we have higher taxes, the inequality goes down. Right? And so we can then just plug this into our beautiful little formula, right? And we can say, how does this right-hand side change? It's obviously going to decrease as we increase the taxes, because as we get more equal, there's going to be less need for high taxes. And so we can say for different values of the average elasticity, how does this thing look? And then we can graph that against the tax rate, and we get this graph here. So what does this show? Here are different values of the elasticity. That right-hand side is going to be higher the lower is elasticity, right? And for different values of elasticity, we can find the optimum by intersecting with the 45-degree line for the taxes. So when the elasticity is low, the optimal taxes are going to be about 70% of income. When the elasticity is 0.3, they'll be about 50% of income. When elasticity is 0.5, it'll be about 40% of income. And when elasticity is very high, 1, it'll be about 25% of income, which is about the average tax rate that an American pays today. Yeah?
Why the 45-degree line again?
Because we're just looking at the solution to this equation. Tax equals optimal tax, right? Right? So it's tax equals optimal tax. Okay. Now, calculating alpha is actually even easier. So the upper part of the U.S. income distribution is a Pareto distribution with a tail with a power of about 1.5. And we can just calculate what is the average income that people who are making above $1 million earn under a Pareto distribution like that. Well, it's the integral from $1 million to infinity of the Pareto distribution times the income over the Pareto distribution, right? And we can just factor a bunch of stuff out. And then we get the integral of I to the negative alpha over I to the negative alpha minus 1. Integrating that, this is just a power thing, so we bring down the exponent of 1 plus that. Right? And we get this. These things are, that gives us this. Dividing through gives us this. So it's 10 to the 6 times alpha over alpha minus 1. So the average income of someone earning more than $1 million is $1 million times alpha over alpha minus 1. And so that gives us that the average value income that they're earning over the average minus $1 million is alpha over alpha minus 1 times alpha over alpha minus 1 minus 1, which is exactly alpha. Hey, guess why I called the other alpha alpha and this thing alpha as well, right? They're exactly the same, right? So, this Pareto tail is a very natural measure of inequality at the top end of the spectrum. The smaller it is, the more inequality there is. And alpha is equal to approximately 1.5, so just plugging that in, we can calculate that if the elasticity of labor supply for the rich people is 0.1, we'd want to charge them about 90% tax on that income, which is what taxes on that income were like prior to the Kennedy administration. If they're 0.3, it's about 70%. If it's 0.5, it's about 60%. And if it's 0.1, it's about 40%. This compares to what we found with the optimal taxes for most people of 67%, 48%, 39, and 26 for those same elasticities. And so, of course, the elasticities are going to be crucial. But just based on the inequality, what we conclude is if there were the same elasticity of income over the whole population as for the rich, we would lean towards having a progressive tax. Actually, quite progressive. It would increase by about 20 percentage points. And the reason is there's a lot more inequality these days in the United States at the top end of the spectrum than there is overall because of the changes that we've been talking about. Yeah, Aaron.
Sorry, could you mention that chunk map again?
Oh, this stuff up here?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the average income above $1 million. We get that by taking the integral of the Pareto distribution times the income over $1 million, right? We can factor out all the things that don't involve income, which are alpha and 1 over I bar times I bar. All that stuff comes out, right? The tops and the bottom cancel, right? Then we just have to do this integral of a power thing, right? How do you do the integral of a power thing? You take the exponent plus 1, and you divide through by that, and then you have the thing to the exponent plus 1, right? Then you evaluate that from 10 to the 6 to infinity. Infinity gives you 0 because this is 1 over something, right? And so you just get this, and then you just cancel some things on the top and bottom, and you get alpha over alpha minus 1. Okay, yeah,
Is
digits.
alpha 1.5 like given for like American society or?
Yeah, that's just calibrated for the U.S. I think it's pretty similar in other places, but I think in France it's small, it's higher. So alpha is higher. Okay, so this suggests that taxes should be progressive, and probably if they're progressive, they should start at the income from tax for most people and sort of gradually ramp up. So you probably don't want to just have the surplus on the surcharge on the rich. Probably people earning about $500,000 or more should have a tax somewhere between that on the millionaires and the people, most people. Okay. Now, evidence on the elasticities is extensive. There's lots of it out there, but it's pretty ambiguous. And the reason is it's mostly based on very short-term tax changes. Like the government raises the tax just for this year, and then it comes back down again, and we see what happens. And this can really bias upward the elasticity, because if people just get charged a higher tax this year, and not in the future, they're going to find a way to make it look like they earn their money next year rather than this year, right? They're going to have their company say, oh, we won't pay you anything this year, we'll pay it all to you next year, or something like that, right? It could also bias downward the elasticity, because imagine that people aren't actually going to reduce the amount they work when the tax goes up, but they might change careers, right? If they change careers, they might not be able to do that in the space of 1 year. And so that might bias downward the labor supply elasticity. Now, what these studies have found is the labor supply elasticity for the rich, how much they actually reduce the amount they work, is essentially 0. I mean, it's definitely less than 0.1. I think the estimate that I heard is approximately 0.01. On the other hand, the elasticity of their taxable income, the amount they actually report that year, is quite high. It's about 1. And Navtesh, why do you think that is? Why would their labor supply elasticity be so low and their taxable income elasticity be so high?
Their labor supply.
So they don't actually change how much they work, but the amount of income they report changes a lot.
They're more flexible in how they can report that.
Yeah, so because rich people can shift the amount of income they earn across years pretty easily, right? Because there's lots of opportunities for tax cheating, for tax shifting, for loopholes, and so forth. A lot of people think that this sort of fake elasticity could largely be addressed by closing loopholes, making tax enforcement better, and so forth. So most people think this shouldn't be counted as part of the elasticity because it could be fixed just by better enforcement. And to the extent that it's coming from stuff like giving to charities, well, that's actually good, and we shouldn't count that as a negative elasticity. So probably the right number is at highest about 0.3 and likely around 0.1 for the labor supply elasticity for the rich. For the middle class, the findings indicate that both the labor supply and taxable income elasticities are about 0.5. And the reason is that it's very hard for ordinary people to do what rich people do, like shift their income across years. They can't really easily pretend like their income was earned in a different year than they did. And almost all this elasticity, by the way, comes not from men choosing how much they're working, but in a married couple, from the women deciding whether or not to work. So most of the elasticity comes from that if taxes are higher, the women decide to work less. And so if we plug in these numbers, this suggests that the average income tax that people pay should be about 40%, which is about 15 percentage points over what they pay right now, and that the rich should be paying about 80%, which is way higher than what they're paying now, especially if you read Warren Buffett's recent article, right? And so this suggests a highly progressive system with very high taxes. So this would be a major change to our current system. So I think a natural question is, does that mean that our current system has way too low taxes and way too little progressivity? Or does it imply that the analysis that we just did was wrong? So I'm pretty sure the analysis we just did was internally right. That is, we did our calculations correctly, and we got the right numbers for the labor supply elasticities. But there's all sorts of factors that were left out of that analysis. So for example, I want to say the analysis we did so far corresponds to what most economists have done when they've analyzed these issues. And I think it's quite an elegant analysis. It's very closely related to the monopoly problem. But it leaves out a whole bunch of other things we might worry about. So one thing, and these were all like some of the libertarian arguments we talked about up front. So one reason is that the rich may be rich precisely because they put more value on their money. So for example, imagine that Maria likes going to watch movies, but Navtej likes watching sunsets rather than watching movies, right? And so Maria is going to work really hard, go work for an investment bank so she can afford to hang out with movie stars, whereas Navtej is just going to go be a bum because all he wants to do is watch beautiful sunsets, right? Would it really make sense to redistribute from Maria to Navtej? Probably not. He wouldn't have anything to do with the money, whereas Maria really values it, right? Another thing is that behind the veil of ignorance, we acted as if everyone was the same. But you probably don't think that people, you probably wouldn't want to think that you have an equal chance of ending up as you or ending up as an animal. We wouldn't want to put the animals behind the veil of ignorance, right? So we wouldn't want to take into account their welfare. But similarly, you might not think there's an equal chance of you ending up as you and ending up as a woman, or ending up as someone living in a poor country or something like that, right? So you might not want to take everyone to be equally likely that you could end up as behind the veil of ignorance. We also don't know which people we should take behind the veil of ignorance. People who are currently alive, people who might be alive, people who are currently unborn. Who belongs behind the veil of ignorance? Another question is just, which people do we care about? Do we care about only the people who are in this room with us? We can imagine ending up as any of them. Or do we care about people who are very far away from us, like people living in Africa? The wealthy people may actually be better at allocating capital and at doing good things with their money. Poor people may sort of piss away their money, and the rich might be sort of very smart and do good things with the money. And that's something that wasn't taken into account in the model. Inequality, on the other hand, might undermine social order. It might cause crime. It might cause social unrest. And that might be another reason to redistribute. We might want to make the income tax very low at the very bottom of the spectrum, or even negative, because we want to encourage people who aren't working at all to work. So that's another factor we didn't take into account. On the problem set, you have to think about the externalities created by different professions and how that might affect optimal taxes. So this is just a small sample of the relevant issues. And all of these issues that I just discussed are things that basically there's been almost no formal work done in economics on. So there's a lot of interesting things to be thought about in this area. And there might be other omitted issues that I didn't talk about. So this is a really interesting